Titanic has been enshrined in today's pop culture as the so-called Ship of Dreams, the very pinnacle of the art of shipbuilding in 1912, the world's largest and most luxurious ship, and all but unchallenged for the foreseeable future. There's only one problem with this. All of it is untrue. Join us as we debunk this long-held misconception. In this episode, we will reveal the true dynamics of the competition on the North Atlantic in 1912. We will show you 3 Atlantic liners that were poised to outdo Titanic, even as Titanic sailed on her maiden voyage, and we will also show you how one of these ships is being brought back to life today by a very dedicated, independent group of talented computer modelers, and how you can support their work. Welcome to the Steam and Splendor Network.
When Titanic sailed on her maiden voyage on April 10, 1912, she was correctly referred to as the world's largest ship. But even then, it was by only the thinnest of margins. Titanic's gross registered tonnage, which confusingly enough is a measurement of enclosed space, not of weight, was slightly larger than her slightly older sister Olympic. However, this was an on-paper measurement only, and the way certain spaces were used aboard a ship gave a lot of leeway in how tonnage was counted. The simple fact is that both Olympic and Titanic were precisely 882 feet 9 inches long, and weighed, or displaced, 52,310 imperial tons of 2,240 pounds each of seawater at their low displacement. There really was no major difference in the size or weight of the two sisters. What was true was that Olympic and Titanic were, in rough terms, some 50% larger in gross tonnage than their immediate predecessors on the North Atlantic, Cunard's Lusitania and Mauretania of 1907. They were also nearly 100 feet longer than the Cunard sisters. It's also important to note that their more moderate speeds and fuller hull form would give their passengers a somewhat more comfortable ride than the passengers on Cunard's sister speedsters. As far as what ships would be more luxurious or palatial, really, there were and remain people who argued just about every angle of that subject. In many ways, it was a matter of personal taste, or reflected somewhat different thinking between Cunard and White Star on certain ways of doing things. But this was far from the complete picture.
What many people don't understand today is that Titanic was only a single link in a chain of successive, competing ships from England, Germany, and France. Beginning in 1897, the German shipping lines Hamburg-Amerika, often referred to as h.a.p.a.g, and Norddeutscher Lloyd had swept in and had laid claim to the bulk of the prestige on the North Atlantic. White Star had put their Oceanic into service in 1899, but it wasn't until 1907 that Cunard had been able to respond with Lusitania and Mauretania, reclaiming much of that prestige. In turn, White Star, which had by then been bought out by American financier J.P. Morgan and rolled into the leading place of his international mercantile marine, came out with Olympic and Titanic as a way of responding to the Cunard sisters. But even by the time the Titanic was entering service in April 1912, other ships, some of which were both larger and more luxurious, were in the works. Cunard's own Aquitania had been laid down in early June 1911, and although her tonnage would not exceed Titanic's, she would be nearly 20 feet longer than Titanic. She launched in April 1913, but even by April 1912, the game was really coming full circle because the Germans were coming back to the North Atlantic in a very, very big way.
It was an event of national pride. The resplendent, enormous hull of the Leviathan ocean liner sat atop the slipways, ready to take to the water for the first time. But this is not Belfast on May 31st, 1911, and the Leviathan in question is not Titanic. This is the Valkenwerk shipyard on the Elbe River in Germany. The date was May 23, 1912, and the ship being launched was become named Imperator, first of the 3 new German sibling liners which were being built to become the last word in North Atlantic seagoing luxury and comfort. By way of quick note, Kaiser Wilhelm II was very supportive of the construction of the new h.a.p.a.g liner, insisted that the ship be referred to by the masculine pronoun. This was in spite of the general maritime tradition of calling a ship by the feminine pronoun. So in this episode, we are going to break with our own habit of referring to ships with feminine pronouns she and her and follow the original tradition. But if we accidentally slip back into our old habits, please keep this in mind. The German Hamburg-Amerika Company had set out to build 3 enormous new ocean liners that would be larger, more luxurious, and faster than Olympic and Titanic, and far beyond the size of Lusitania and Mauretania. By the time Titanic started her maiden voyage, the first of these behemoths, Imperator, was only 6 weeks away from being launched. The Hamburg-Amerika Line had been founded in 1847 and was often referred to by the acronym spelled out by its full German spelled name, known as h.a.p.a.g. By 1899, a man named Albert Ballin had become the general director of h.a.p.a.g. Ballin was a man of humble origins who had steadily worked his way up through the echelons of banking and business. His astounding rise led to him becoming a personal friend of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the Emperor of Germany, and gave him a great influence in business and political matters of the time. It was under his watchful eye and the backing of Kaiser Wilhelm that h.a.p.a.g had embarked on this audacious project.
Imperator's hull was 909 feet long, with a maximum breadth of 98 feet 1 inch. In other words, she was about 26 feet longer than Titanic and just less than 6 feet wider. Imperator's 46 boilers would vent combustion gases from enormously tall smokestacks, and Imperator would sport 3 of these. In this, Imperator was the first of the major liners to break with the recent fixation of having 4 funnels, and was clearly paving the way for the profiles of future liners. Imperator's gross tonnage would be 52,117, making it the first ocean liner to break the 50,000-ton mark and the first to exceed 900 feet in length. It would be able to carry well over 5,700 passengers and crew, with its passengers divided into no less than 4 separate classes. Without a doubt, Imperator was a monster ship, but it was also built to be quick, with an intended service speed of 23 knots, 2 knots faster than the Olympic class's intended service speed. The liner would also sport no less than 8 turbine engines on 4 propeller shafts. In the wake of the Titanic disaster, it was important to have lifeboat accommodations for everyone. All of Imperator's 83 lifeboats were stowed away in a number of clever locations around the ship. Her system of 12 transverse watertight compartments was quickly supplemented with the addition of longitudinal bulkheads lining the outer hull to help prevent the spread of flooding if the outer hull was ruptured. To prove her watertight capability to a nervous traveling public, her builders then had the local Hamburg Fire Department bring in a fire pumper and test fill the spaces between the inner and outer hulls. Inside, Imperator's first-class interior spaces would offer passengers unprecedented space, luxury, and comfort on the North Atlantic. The task of creating these spaces had been given to h.a.p.a.g's resident architect. His name was Charles-Frederic Mevez.
When Cunard had commissioned Lusitania and Mauretania, they had contracted specific architects to create the scheme of interior decoration for each ship. However, and quite surprisingly today, this was not entirely the standard of the times. Quite often, it was a team from the shipyard, often in coordination with key personnel at the commissioning shipping company, or even a favorite subcontracted firm, that designed and arrived at a scheme of internal decoration for a liner under construction. However, Ballin had commissioned architect Charles-Frederic to design the major interior spaces of h.a.p.a.g's new liner, America, which entered service in 1905. The collaboration was an instant success, and all but ensured that Myths would be tapped again to design the interior spaces of the new h.a.p.a.g liners. Myths created spaces that referenced earlier periods of design, but on a grander and more spectacular scale than anything previously seen on the North Atlantic. The first-class dining saloon was reminiscent in many ways of Lusitania's, with white enamel, Corinthian columns, and encompassing 2 decks with a central well, capped off by an elegantly decorated dome on a third. It was large enough, however, to seat all first-class passengers in a single seating. Above, on B deck, the social hall encompassed an astonishing 4,200 square feet, and through the ingenious use of certain construction techniques usually incorporated into bridge building, the space was entirely opened, with 20-foot-high ceilings, and with no columns supporting the roof, and enormous dome and skylights. There was also a winter garden and a Ritz-Carlton restaurant. Unlike Olympic and Titanic's extra tariff restaurants, which were often referred to as Ritz restaurants, but were not actually affiliated with the famous Ritz hotels, Imperator's Ritz-Carlton restaurant actually was affiliated with the Ritz hotels in partnership between the two companies. Below, the swimming pool was rendered in ancient Roman, Pompeian themes, and was so stunning that it made the swimming baths on Olympic and Titanic look like Spartan afterthoughts in terms of size, designs, and decor.
At the bow of Imperator, the ancient mariner's tradition of a figurehead was revived in the form of an enormous eagle gripping in its talons a globe inscribed with the words "Mein Feld ist die Welt," or "The world is my field," sometimes translated as "The world is my oyster." This eagle was not just for decoration, it had a very real purpose. At the time, Cunard's Aquitania, the third running mate in their own trio of Atlantic liners, was being built in Scotland. That liner's overall length was being kept a maddening secret, and rumors were swirling that Aquitania would be a longer ship than Imperator was. In order to help prevent that, the Eagle was added to Imperator's bow, adding critical length and helping to pad any margin of advantage the new German liner had over Aquitania. The figurehead increased Imperator's overall length from 909 feet to 918 feet 1 inch. In point of fact, even without the Eagle, Aquitania's overall length would prove to be only 901 feet. This meant that Imperator never did need the figurehead to claim the title of world's longest ship.
Sadly, her completion and entry into service was marked by multiple issues, including deadly accidents. Before her trials, she ran aground briefly in the river Elbe. One of her boilers exploded, killing 5 crewmen. The maiden voyage had already been postponed once, and it was postponed again. Imperator began her maiden voyage starting in Cuxhaven on Tuesday, June 10, 1913. The next morning she called at Southampton, England, and then sailed for New York, where she arrived on June 18th. During the maiden voyage, more issues became apparent. As fuel was burned off and the ship grew lighter, it was clear that she was top-heavy, rolling drunkenly to one side and then another rather quickly, and seemingly in no rush to return to an even keel. By the time she had arrived in New York Harbor, her bunkers further depleted. She was visibly off balance, and any hope that she would look trim and proper as she came into port was dashed as she rolled from one side to another, coming to port for the first time. During her first stay in New Jersey at her Hoboken pier, a small fire broke out in her aft passenger quarters. Fireboats doused the fire with too much water, and the ship listed dramatically to starboard. Fortunately, the ship did not capsize, and she can make her return crossing without further incident. To combat the stability issues, during her first winter overhaul, some 13 feet were removed from the tops of her funnels, and a significant quantity of heavy fittings and furnishings were torn out of her upper decks to be replaced with lighter ones. Some 2,000 tons of cement were poured into the ship's double bottom to add weight lower down and help aid stability.
While Imperator had clearly suffered from some teething issues, she was just the first of the German return salvo to the recent Cunard and White Star liners. A larger, somewhat perfected version of Imperator was then nearing time for a debut on the North Atlantic. She was named Vaterland. SS Vaterland was a sister ship to the Imperator. She was even longer, at 950 feet, and wider. She was the first Atlantic liner to achieve the milestone of having a maximum breadth of 100 feet. Her gross tonnage was also higher than Imperator's, at 54,281.718, which would officially round up to 54,282.
Inside and out, Vaterland bore a number of differences from Imperator. However, she was clearly closely related to the older vessel, with a similar three-funnel profile, similar interior layout, and similar decor and features. Vaterland's first-class interior spaces also enjoyed a key upgrade over Imperator. Whereas the uptakes for Imperator's smokestacks were of the typical centralized type, on Vaterland these uptakes for the combustion gases and smoke from the boilers below were divided and pushed outboard from the ship's centerline. This allowed for some breathtaking advantages in the layout of her public rooms over Imperator, and virtually all preceding ocean liners, which had all been forced to wrap their layout designs around the uptakes.
This arrangement had never allowed for a long line of sight through the major public rooms on a ship from fore to aft. Vaterland had been built in a different shipyard from Imperator, the legendary Blohm & Voss shipyard, founded in 1877. Amazingly, in spite of nearly 150 years of turbulence in the world scene, Blohm & Voss is still in business today, one of the few shipyards of that era that has survived into the 21st century. Vaterland's keel had been laid in September 1911, before the Titanic disaster, and because she was in the early stages of construction when Titanic sank, it was even easier to make post-Titanic alterations, which had been included in Imperator already, into Vaterland's design. Vaterland would have 72 lifeboats when she entered service. Her stern and rudder design was quite different from Imperator's, and more like that found on Lusitania and Mauretania. Vaterland was launched on April 3, 1913, just weeks before Imperator's maiden voyage, and by Thursday, May 14, 1914, she was ready to begin her maiden voyage from Cuxhaven to New York. In the words of Frank Brainerd, a brilliant maritime historian who focused much of his career on the German liners, there can be no doubt that the Vaterland was a substantial improvement over the Imperator, and she was well ahead of her British rivals in size and refinements. There was even talk as the time came closer for her trials and maiden voyage that she might make a serious try for the Atlantic Speed Crown. Nor was Vaterland the last of the planned German Leviathans. A third entrant of the class, Bismarck, which would be larger again than Vaterland, was laid down at Blohm & Voss in August 1913 and launched on June 20th, 1914, shortly after Vaterland's maiden voyage. As Bismarck took to the water that day, the dream of Hamburg-Amerika's Albert Ballin to have a trio of the world's largest and most luxurious ships in his fleet again looked like it was about to come true. Sadly, within weeks of Vaterland's maiden voyage, and only 8 days after Bismarck's launch, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were assassinated, and the dominoes had been set in motion that would begin the First World War. That world conflict would forever and indelibly alter the future careers of all three ships, Imperator, Vaterland, and Bismarck. The three ships would never sail together under the h.a.p.a.g house flag, and architect Myths would be dead before the summer of 1914 had ended, and before the war had ended, Albert Ballin had also passed away. As much as the Olympic-class liners are often regarded as the tragic sisters, the Ballin trio were tragic in another sense. Although each of the three ships lived long lives and had remarkable and successful careers, they would never serve together as originally intended.
But at this moment, let's rewind and take a moment to reflect on some of those final halcyon days before the outbreak of the first genuinely global war. In the late spring of 1914, as Vaterland was about to begin her maiden voyage, there was optimism for the future. No one could imagine, let alone really understand, the horrors that would begin to unfold with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand just 8 days after Bismarck was launched. As far as anyone could really foresee, Vaterland's future career with h.a.p.a.g would be long and happy. And it is here, at this happy moment in history, that we will introduce you all to the very dedicated team who have banded together to bring Vaterland to life in her original 1914 configuration, the way that she was as she began her career for h.a.p.a.g. The team call themselves Project Vaterland. Two of their developers are based in Germany, not far from where Vaterland was built, while the third is based in the United States. And make no mistake, this small, independent team is very, very serious in their work to bring Vaterland back to life.
Our team here at the Steam and Splendor Network includes maritime historians who have done a great deal of work on the history of Imperator, Vaterland, and Bismarck. This includes Kent's 2005 self-published book, Atlantic Liners, A Trio of Trios, which was later replaced by the now out-of-print book, The Edwardian Superliners, A Trio of Trios. Tad Fitch and frequent Steam and Splendor contributor Michael Poirier did a book that told the stories of many liners, including the three German behemoths, and their experiences during World War I. And our team is absolutely stunned with the work that Project Vaterland is doing on the last pre-war great liner.
Over the past couple of years, Project Vaterland has been making steady progress in rebuilding the ocean liner. Every effort is being made to make their model as accurate as possible to Vaterland as it appeared in its one and only season of service, cut short by World War I. This includes extensive research into Vaterland's design and construction, contacting and visiting various museums and archives in the process, and gathering what little material was still available about the ship. The team also spent much time gaining proficiency in the computer software that they would use to build the ship. Project Vaterland's development group has set a reasonable goal of not building the entirety of the ship, but rather a large representative part. This includes the public spaces of every class, along with some select engineering and crew spaces, and perhaps a few example cabins or staterooms per class. They've even gone to the vital, but very complicated length of modeling Vaterland with proper shear and camber.
Incredibly, Vaterland would also have a direct tie to another ship that made many headlines during the first part of 2025, the SS United States. How? Well, in her post-war life, Vaterland would serve as the flagship of the United States lines under the name Leviathan. Her conversion from Vaterland to Leviathan was overseen by naval architect William Francis Gibbs, who would later design the SS United States. And in a future video, we will tell the story of this fascinating connection between the two legendary and historic liners. Right now, Project Vaterland is an entirely independent team. Having been involved in efforts to bring multiple ships back to life virtually, including our current project, Lusitania the Greyhound's Wake, I can personally relate to how much this team is going to need both publicity and interaction with the ocean liner community, and how much they will need financial support in the weeks and months ahead. So how can you help them out? If you check out the links in the video description, you will find where you can contribute to their project and help them bring Vaterland back to her finished glory. You also really need to do yourself a favor and check out the current state of their tour aboard the ship on their website. Finally, we encourage you to subscribe to their YouTube channel, which is just getting off the ground. We also really hope that we will be able to work with the core team from Project Vaterland right here on the Steam and Splendor network to help tell the stories of these 3 ships in even more detail than we've outlined in this single episode. We also hope to bring future updates about their project to you all right here on our channel.
Project Vaterland is a vital effort to restore the Imperator-class liners to their rightful place in maritime history. Everyone knows about Titanic. Many people know about her sisters, Olympic and Britannic. There's a lot of awareness about Lusitania, Mauretania, and Aquitania. But in order to understand Titanic and how she fit into the evolving transatlantic competition in the first 15 years or so of the 20th century, you must also compare her with a German trio of liners. As soon as someone understands that Imperator was just days from launching when Titanic started her maiden voyage, one realizes that there's a lot of myths out there about Titanic. In the moment that Imperator slid down the ways and took to the water for the first time, Titanic would lose the title of the largest moving object in the world. If she had survived her maiden voyage, Titanic would have been eclipsed as the largest and most luxurious ship in the world in the spring of 1913. And had the war not intervened, it's very likely that the Cunard and White Star trios of liners would have been hard-pressed to keep up with competition from the 3 h.a.p.a.g giants. How differently would things have played out if Titanic hadn't sunk and the war had not intervened? This is the sort of thing that fires the imagination.
Truly, the Imperator, Vaterland, and Bismarck's place in maritime history has all too long been overlooked. Moving forward through Project Vaterland and our own work here on the Steam and Splendor network, we will be helping to tell the story of the great trio of ocean liners that were not only bigger and faster, but also more luxurious than the legendary r.m.s. Titanic.
A special thank you to our supporters on Patreon, including NikkiChan92, Dean McIntosh, Evan Fleming, Lucas Sidlowski, Bluebird Nut, Martin Cahill, Sam Forker, Mark Gegenheimer, Maximilian Metcalf, Rachel Warner Sanchez, and Snow Monkey.